New Gibson video dropped. Let's see what it's about. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. So just in case you don't know, Gibson has two different channels now. Gibson Gear Guide can produce whatever they want, from comparisons of models, to talking to Joe Bonamassa, or checking out what Phil X is up to today. But they recently dropped a custom shop tour, which is a whole hour and a half, but watching this, I got excited about a few key moments. And to start things off, let's talk about the eye candy. Green Tea ES335. That's an interesting take on Iguana Burst. Like, it's a little bit darker, maybe not as yellow, but it just looks very unique at all these angles. It's got a nice subtle flame top to it as well. But next, check out this cool historic spec Les Paul Custom. It's got a burl maple top. I mean, it might not be the craziest thing we've ever seen, but it's so unique. I love tops like that have character and just a beautiful, slightly aged natural finish. They also showed off some pretty wild Les Paul Customs, with this white one being adorned with 3 pickups and the Super 400 inlays. That's a cool one. But it's this 54 that caught my attention. About a year ago, I told the Music Zoo, you guys need to make some TV Yellow 54 customs. And they said, sure, we'll do it. It might just take a year and a half, so it might be soon that they happen. And I don't know if this is necessarily one of theirs, but it's got the staple pickup in the neck, but a mini humbucker in the bridge. And then to throw things even crazier, they did a wrap tail like a gold top, rather than your typical Tune-o-matic stop bar tailpiece. I can't help but to think that if these custom orders are actually for a customer, they're going to be thrilled knowing that theirs was on a Gibson video. I know I would be. But by far, my favorite custom color that we saw here was actually a Custom Shop 70s Deluxe. So when the Mike Ness Deluxe came out, ever since that point, the Custom Shop started to produce correct pancake bodies, but this one has a really cool neon finish if we're talking about the old Gibson Vegas series colors. But it's that dark purple burst with the pinkish red interior of the burst on a nice plain top, but instead of mini humbuckers, they opted for P90s, so that's pretty cool in my book. That's a beautiful high gloss finish, and then the back is supposedly a dark purple color instead of black, but what's really cool about the specs of this being a 76 is it's got the volute and it's a maple neck, and the maple wood being a lighter shade than the mahogany, you can kind of see that purple come into play. And then they were showing you this cool like frost blue 355 with the long guard. However, I noticed something in the footage. There appears to be a little mark right here on the edge of the guitar. I'm not sure if that was a reflection or something we're going to talk about later on, but keep that in mind. But now let's get into the nitty-gritty details of it, the building process in reverse order. Mainly because there's some real gems I think people are missing towards the end of this video that need discussed further. So first off, they're saying there's an RFID chip in custom shop guitars. Now, if you don't know what that stands for, it's radio frequency identification. It's the same thing that you'll find in many modern day credit cards. So in the final assembly, these two workers scanned that to double check the specs of the guitar to make sure it was built right. And this got me thinking, can a regular Joe buy an RFID scanner and get the exact same information? And if so, why does Gibson not sell those with their own branding on it? Because hear me out. Custom shop lovers, we're a crazy group of people. Like, we would be willing to spend $400 if it means peace of mind that we can scan a guitar and, ever since they started putting that chip in, know that if it reads back with something, we can A, verify the specs, and B, know it is 1000% authentic and not like a really high-end luthier replica build. I think that could be a potential new market for Gibson to get into. I mean, looking online, they seem to range between like $100 to all the way up to $800 plus, some as cheap as $40. But what I don't know about that technology is it encrypted? Will it only read on their particular systems, or can you just use any of them? If anybody has more experience with RFID, feel free to let me know, because if I can buy this and scan custom shop guitars to get their nitty-gritty detail specs, I think that's worth it for the show. But continuing on, I feel Gibson produced this video to kind of help show you some of the workers behind the custom shop, because Anderton's just recently did a nice tour, but we didn't really get to talk to too many employees. But I got a chuckle about the segment of Pete and how he's doing final assembly, putting the pickups in, wiring the electronics, final assembly of the nut, all that good stuff. And Dinesh jokingly says, "Do you think you can do one of these Les Pauls blindfolded?" And Pete thinks about it and goes, "Yeah, probably." But then he really lights up when he's like, "But I know I can do a 335. Now, if you don't understand why that is different, you gotta remember 335s, they do not have a backplate. You gotta fish them through the cavities, which is a little bit more of a skilled process. So that's why he got that proud smile on his face. So thank you, Pete, for your playful jab there. He's worked at Gibson for 23 years. But next, if you go around the 55.5-minute mark, I thought this would be a really cool piece of Gibson history to own one day. Like when they retire it, it just says Gibson at the top, machine head drill template. So some manufacturers, including Gibson themselves back in the 70s and 80s, they don't always get things exactly right, and some of these tuners are harder to line up than others. This is actually a separate template that they use a drill to put the holes in. Now this one looks like it's for some sort of occlusion one, but I'm sure they have it for Grovers. That ensures accuracy as long as the jig is lined up correctly. But next up, some interesting information. Gibson Custom Shop got their first Plek machine in 2005. Now speaking to this employee here, they still do the hand leveling of the frets. However, they do the fine tuning in the Plek machine. Our next employee showcase comes in the Murphy lab. In the nicest way possible, Tom Murphy peeking out through that door. He just looks like a mad scientist. It's funny. They blur out the guitar. They don't want anybody to know what they're doing in there. Chest freezers, aliens, laser guns, who knows? So next we step into the finishing department with Scott. He's been at Gibson for 32 years. And unlike many employees that we'll talk about today, he's only ever been in the custom shop finishing department. So whenever I hear like 32 years, I think, yeah, that's a long time, but let's actually do the math. 2024 minus 32. That means he has been in the custom shop since its inception. Because that opens in late 1993. So he might have been part of the crew who built the custom shop. That means a lot more to me personally because that's how my brain works with my understanding of Gibson culture, lore, and history. So that means this guy saw the original Tom Murphy before he got his super ultra big cult following, eventually left Gibson, has eventually come back for a few projects, left again, then eventually has his own department. He's been there for all of it. And it's always fun to me to try to guess when these videos were filmed. So this had to have been right before the gold and silver 335 sparkles were released. Those are Gibson.com exclusives, I believe. You can see the silver ones up here. They're $8,200 on Gibson's website. But I thought this shot was cool. In the wild, to find consecutive serial numbers, it's fairly uncommon, but very cool when you do. But next we need to check in with these ladies who work with stamping the serial numbers. So it looks like they have another template to make sure that the serial number goes in roughly the same place every time. But it was really cool to see their rubber stamper. But this next part was very fascinating to me. They have a little touch-up pen, just in case the stamp isn't perfect. So that worker has to have a very fine handwriting in order to make it not look goofy. But if you were to find a slightly goofy looking headstock where the font is maybe just a little bit different, perhaps that would be the explanation for it. Next we've got Lisa. I thought this was a unique opportunity to see a guitar after the spraying stage of the finish. Believe it or not, that's a Les Paul custom. You just can't see the binding yet. So Lisa has to take their custom made carving tools. They just order metal stock and they file them down to the angles that they need. And then she painstakingly goes through and scrapes the finish off of it because that's just easier than taping off the binding before they spray it. But as more info behind the spraying process, I found it interesting. They had 2 different rooms. He said that's where the oddball colors go. So, you know, custom orders, things like that. It's just funny to me that they get their own separate division. You guys are too crazy for us. Only bursts in the primary room. But it makes sense, you know, glitter, sparkle, flakes, contamination stuff. But throughout the segment, I thought it was quite fascinating how different that bangle burst looks. So on the website, it looks like this. So we've got the process of them right here. They almost look like Joe Perry boneyards at this point. But then later on, they get the red border added, and then it becomes what we all know. And in case you don't believe me, check out the shot at the 7-second mark. But before the finishing process, you know, we gotta make the guitar, so let's dive into that journey together. I found this shot rather fascinating. It's an SG that looks like the neck is not set properly, right? You've got your tenon right here. So when we talk about neck tenons, when I tear guitars apart, long neck, short neck, transitional neck tenon, if we're in the 70s, what we're talking about is it's a continuation of the neck that goes into the body right here. But I found it fascinating that it was sticking up right there because they have to angle the neck. So there must be another process that kind of files that down to make it completely smooth again. And then in this segment, they talk more about the aniline dyes and how they have their own special room because they're super contaminating. They have their own racks that say aniline dyed guitars only. It's going to stain other guitars if it happens to be put on that same rack. So if we go back to that frost blue, is that an aniline dye stain? I'm not sure. It could be anything, but it certainly caught my eye as I was watching that segment. But I found it interesting that, it's a dye. It's a stain that they put on. It honestly doesn't look that good at that point until you put your 8 coats of Lacquer Plus on top of it. So it's cool to see it in the raw format. But next we check in with Eric. This is something I've always wanted to see. You see a neck here. It's mahogany. It's a little bit of walnut. You've got your maple stripe for your truss rod channel that we'll talk about a little bit more here in a minute. That's very clearly a Firebird. But as you continue on down, it's the rare sight of a wingless Firebird. I was just thinking the other day, because I was filming a Firebird episode, I want to see a Firebird Bo Diddley-ified. But there's just a whole bunch of them right here. But you can see the V-channel routes that they throw in there. I would love to see the wings of a Firebird, but not on the guitar. Because I know other companies have done this, have like a rail where you can put whatever you want on it, but as a fun, quirky, limited edition to have like different colored Firebird wings that you could throw on there, or other body styles like have a neck through Les Paul or the neck through SG, and you just flip out the wings. I don't think it would be a huge popular seller, but a limited edition of like 400, you can bet your butt those things would sell. But as they're gluing on the fretboards, I found it was interesting that they build a lot of their own machinery as far as their hydraulic presses go and like what we were just talking about with their fret files. And now around the 27.5-minute mark, this is key. Even if we're talking a Black Beauty Les Paul Custom that is strictly mahogany, it's a mahogany body, there's no maple top put on it, still carved, mahogany neck. Now, yeah, we've got the ebony fretboard. But if you think your guitar is straight mahogany, you're technically wrong, because in the neck, Gibson historically puts this little strip of maple. And I always point that out in my teardowns because I always find it fascinating. So in many ways, everybody's always like, yeah, Fender's got the skunk stripes on XXX models. I wish Gibson would do a skunk stripe. They technically do. It's just on the other side. That's funny. I like that. And then obviously our fretboard gets put on top of that. It didn't have that. Tim was in buffing for 3.5 decades before he came into the custom shop. So once again, let's do our math. It's 2024, roughly 43 years in service. That puts him joining Gibson in 1981. So that's like at the birth of the Gibson Heritage series. We're starting to think about releasing the prehistoric lines. It's before the Spotlight specials. This is like right after the Les Paul KM style stuff. That means he would have started in the maple neck era of Gibson, and they're transitioning out of that starting in 82. He roamed the halls of Gibson back when we talk about the likes of Randy Leonard and his father Floyd Leonard. So maybe they knew each other, maybe not. But I hope that puts you into perspective of how long Tim has been at Gibson and all he's been through. So Norland era ends after 1985. So he was there for 1986 when the Henry J era starts. Their whole flopping around for a couple of years before the Les Paul Classic and Slash saves the company. The opening of the custom shop, and then if you want to jump forward into 2019 with new management taking over. So he's been part of 3 different ownerships of the company and has been there to experience it all. He's seen models come and go, especially if he's been buffing them. That's really exciting to me. I bet he's got some good stories that even he doesn't remember he has. But around the 27-minute mark, our next employee is Butch. He's the one that does the binding along the body. And he's been at Gibson for 46 years. So that puts him joining at 1978, which is around the time Randy Leonard also started. But that puts him a little bit closer to the opening of the Nashville plant, as we know it today. So they had just moved from Kalamazoo down to Nashville to set up the new shop. When they're talking about the newbies that they were hiring, he was kind of one of them after just a couple of years. But now he's at the formal custom shop. He's another one that I bet has some cool stories. And at the 14-minute mark, I've always personally been a bit confused. People call the original 50s customs mahogany tops. And it's because technically the top is also made of mahogany. And I think there are different runs where sometimes it is just a mahogany top, depending on the era it was produced. And I very well could be wrong on that, but you gotta remember, there's a lot of different runs throughout the history of Gibson. But it appears at least the current production and many of the 50s originals are actually just a mahogany body that they shape into size. That's the other cool thing to see around here is just how big the guitars are before they're shaped into their final size. This photo right here on the CNC machine really sells it. So I always thought the relief carving guitars, like Slash's Snake Pit that Bruce Kunkel worked on, I thought maybe they had to start with an extra thick slab of maple on top. And maybe in the late 90s they did things differently, but it almost appears like they work with enough material to get it down to the shape that they need, because you have to have the carved top to start with anyway, so you're going to need a thick piece of wood. Similar to what they're doing here, and then have enough room to work with for their relief carving, which is cool. Honestly, that's something I want to get into next. I love these art guitars so much. I want to start to get into the custom carving like Rick Heinrichsen. He's an inspiration, right? But that's something I want to work on in the coming years. But as we continue deconstructing the Les Paul, I found this rather fascinating. We get to see the route channel. So that's going to be where your toggle switches and your pickup wires come through, and then you eventually get into your back control plate. But we can also see the 9-hole weight relief. That's pretty cool. But eventually that maple top does get slapped on here and carved up, so you don't necessarily see this unless you're taking things apart. But the thing I missed the first time is look at how these are stacked. Wouldn't it just stink if your whole stack fell over and you got a big ding over here that you can't steam out? This is high quality premium selected lumber. So do you see what they've done here? There's an extra little jut that at some point in time definitely gets sawn off. But they have like a little wooden dowel that kind of helps them keep in place, I would assume. Or maybe that's actually for something else, like the machine operator has to use that to help position it. I'm not sure. I almost thought it went through the whole thing to secure the stack. That's why I was going into that story, but maybe not that exact reason. But they showed us a cool wood library selection at about the 5.5-minute mark. At first, I thought they just transported into the Gibson garage, and maybe it is a similar space that they can take like their artist, like when Jimmy Page comes to visit, to check out. But I found these color samples on the back wall quite fascinating. It's not a full thickness top, but I found it fascinating that the color samples also have the carved top to it. Because they could have easily just, took a body blank, put the color on it. But sometimes it's the burst pattern that, brings out the true color. So I understand why they did it that way. They've got some interesting wood here, some koa, but this one was pretty cool. So they've got some one-piece top stock. You don't find one-piece tops out of Gibson too often, and when they do surface to the market, they generally sell for silly premiums. But that one's got a pretty cool quilt top to it. Looks like they graded it 4A on the blank. But personally, yeah, that's the one I would want. But alright, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed this recap and expansion upon Gibson's new video. And again, check the whole thing out for yourself. I didn't cover everything. My idea here is to build upon what was presented, but there's a lot more information in it. So please, check that link in the description. Go visit it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care.